December 5, 1975, began like any other Friday for Lindy Sue Biechler. Lindy, who was 19 at the time, was a flower shop clerk and was a newlywed, having married her husband, Phil Biechler, about a year prior. They shared an apartment in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Lindy had spent her day working, and in the early evening, she made a trip to the market to pick up groceries. Sometime between 6:45 p.m. and 7:05 p.m., Lindy returned to her apartment. The grocery bags, still full of their contents, sat on her dining room table, a silent testament to the normalcy of the evening that was abruptly interrupted. At some point, an intruder gained entry to her home. What followed was a violent struggle within the confines of her apartment. Lindy fought for her life, suffering defensive wounds as she desperately tried to ward off her attacker. Evidence at the scene would later suggest a sexual motive behind the brutal assault, and then investigators believed her attacker knew her. Later that evening, at approximately 8:46 p.m., Lindy's aunt and uncle arrived at her home. What they discovered inside the apartment was a scene of unspeakable horror. Lindy Sue Biechler was found lying on her back in the living room, a knife protruding from her neck. A tea towel was wrapped around the wooden handle of the knife. Investigators later confirmed the knife was one of a set from her own kitchen knife block. The immediate scene was grim. Blood was observed on the outside of the front door, on the wall in the entryway, and in various patches on the carpet. The Lancaster County Coroner's Office arrived to process the scene. Their findings were chilling. Lindy had suffered 19 to her neck, chest, upper abdomen, and back. The cause of death was ruled as massive bleeding. In the immediate aftermath of the horrific discovery, detectives from the Manor Township Police Department, bolstered by the assistance of the Pennsylvania State Police, launched an exhaustive investigation into Lindy Sue Biechler's murder. They worked tirelessly, following every conceivable lead and meticulously processing the evidence found at the crime scene. In the days and weeks that followed, nearly 100 people were interviewed. Police appealed to the public for information, even asking about a dark-colored, standard-size American car with its headlights on, double-parked near the apartment complex between 7 p.m. and 8:40 p.m. on the night of the murder. One of the first critical steps was to clear Lindy's husband, Phil Biechler, as a suspect. Investigators quickly determined he was at work when the murder occurred, and DNA evidence, once technology advanced, would further confirm he was not the source of the biological material found at the scene. By February 1976, police reported they had interviewed between 250 and 300 people, and a prevailing belief among investigators was that the killer remained in the Lancaster area. Despite their diligent efforts, the case remained stubbornly unsolved. It became one of Lancaster County's most enduring and frustrating cold cases, a stark reminder of a young life violently cut short and a killer who evaded capture. As technology evolved, so did the investigative approach. In 1997, decades after the crime, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office took a pivotal step. They submitted evidence from the crime scene for DNA analysis. This foresight proved critical. A male DNA profile was successfully obtained from the right area of Biechler's underwear, confirmed to contain semen. In 2000, this unique DNA profile was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, a nationwide database that compiles DNA profiles from convicted individuals. However, for years, the database yielded no match. The wait for a breakthrough continued, a testament to the persistent dedication of law enforcement and the enduring hope of Lindy's family. The landscape of forensic investigation began to change dramatically in the late 2010s with the emergence of forensic genetic genealogy. This innovative technique, which combines DNA analysis with genealogical research, offered a new beacon of hope for cold cases that had long gone dormant. In January 2019, nearly 44 years after the murder, a significant new chapter opened for the Lindy Sue Biechler case. With the full agreement and cooperation of the Manor Township Police Department, the case was officially taken on by the recently formed Lancaster County District Attorney's Cold Case Unit. This dedicated unit, comprising experienced detectives and prosecutors, was specifically designed to re-examine long unresolved cases with fresh perspectives and access to cutting-edge scientific advancements. In June 2019, the Cold Case Unit enlisted the specialized expertise of Parabon Nanolabs, a private Virginia-based firm renowned for its work in DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. Parabon's Snapshot Advanced DNA Analysis Service was employed to analyze the DNA evidence from the crime scene. This service goes beyond traditional DNA profiling by predicting physical characteristics of the DNA contributor. By September 2019, Parabon Nanolabs delivered their initial findings. Composite images, also known as phenotypes, based on the DNA evidence. These weren't speculative drawings, but scientific predictions of characteristics such as skin tone, eye color, and hair color, depicting the likely appearance of the suspect at ages 25 and 65. The release of these composites, coupled with the launch of a dedicated website, was a strategic move to generate renewed public interest and solicit new tips from the community. It was also at this time that authorities publicly confirmed that DNA evidence had definitively cleared Lindy's husband as the source of the DNA found at the scene, dispelling any lingering whispers or speculation. In December 2020, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office took the next crucial step, requesting Parabon to proceed with a more in-depth genetic genealogy analysis. This specialized research involved building extensive family trees based on the crime scene DNA, looking for distant relatives who had voluntarily uploaded their DNA to public genealogy databases. C.C. Moore, the genetic genealogist of Parabon Nanolabs, became a central figure in this phase. Her meticulous research yielded a startling and incredibly specific lead. Her analysis indicated that Lindy Biechler's murderer likely had ancestors from Gasparina, a small town in southern Italy. This pivotal piece of information, combined with other factors, dramatically narrowed the immense pool of potential suspects. Moore revealed that approximately 2,300 people with Italian genetic ties were living in Lancaster County around the time of the killing. These restrictions significantly limited the scope of subsequent research, as very few individuals living in Lancaster at the time of the crime were the right age, gender, and had a family tree consistent with these specific origins. Moore then further narrowed the candidates by cross-referencing with public records, newspaper archives, and other resources. The exhaustive genetic genealogy research eventually identified a single, compelling person of interest: David C. Napoli. What made this identification particularly remarkable was that C. Napoli, who had previously lived in the same 4-unit apartment complex as Lindy Biechler, had never been on the radar of investigators during the decades of the initial investigation. The new cutting-edge DNA evidence was the only reason he emerged as a suspect. With C. Napoli now identified as a prime suspect, investigators initiated discreet surveillance. The meticulous planning culminated on February 11, 2022, when a crucial opportunity arose. While C. Napoli was at the Philadelphia International Airport, detectives were able to surreptitiously obtain a discarded coffee cup he had used and thrown into a trash can. This seemingly ordinary object held the key to unlocking a nearly 5-decade-old mystery. The coffee cup was immediately sent to DNA Labs International for testing. In June 2022, Cybergenetics Advanced Computer Analysis delivered irrefutable evidence. The DNA from C. Napoli's coffee cup and the DNA identified in the semen on Biechler's underwear had a match statistic that was staggering. Around 10 trillion. This astronomical number essentially confirmed a match beyond any reasonable doubt. Further corroborating evidence emerged when detectives consulted a blood spatter expert to analyze 2 blood spots found on the exposed part of Lindy's pantyhose. These tiny yet critical pieces of evidence were also sent for DNA testing. In June 2022, these blood drops were also determined to be consistent with the DNA profile obtained from Biechler's underwear, further solidifying the link to the suspect. The evidence was overwhelming and conclusive. On July 17, 2022, nearly 47 years after the brutal crime, the 68-year-old David C. Napoli was arrested at his Lancaster home. He was charged with criminal homicide in connection with the murder of Lindy Sue Biechler and was held without bail. The legal process for a case nearly half a century old began on October 19, 2023. David C. Napoli appeared in Lancaster County Court. Faced with the irrefutable DNA evidence, he pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary in the 1975 killing of Lindy Sue Biechler. As part of a plea agreement, which was governed by the laws in place in 1975, before modern sentencing guidelines existed, C. Napoli was immediately sentenced to an aggregate prison term of 25 to 50 years in a state correctional facility. Given his advanced age, the judge acknowledged that this was, effectively, a life sentence. In court, Assistant District Attorney Christine Wilson, who prosecuted the case, acknowledged a photo of Lindy Biechler displayed next to the defendant.
These cases are never forgotten. Lindy Sue will never be forgotten. While the defendant was able to carry on with his life, Lindy was extinguished by him. Look at her, and the precious life you stole in 1975.
C. Napoli, when allowed to speak, offered an apology to everyone, including her wife. However, Judge David Ashworth remarked that his words and conduct did not convey genuine remorse. Nearly 48 years after Lindy Sue Biechler's life was so brutally and senselessly taken, the guilty plea brought a formal and definitive close to Lancaster County's oldest cold case. The tireless efforts of investigators, the advancements in DNA technology, and the unwavering commitment to justice finally provided answers and a measure of peace for Lindy's family.